yeah. So I'm the guy who grew the first fruit in space, and I
Wow.
worked with on the NASA plant science team. We had
Okay.
three systems on the International Space Station. Two of them are a system called Veggie, and then you can Google this and stuff later. But Veggie is just a growth light with a bag around it, and the astronauts inject water into these pillows, and they keep the plants growing. That's how NASA started. We had to prove Darwin wrong initially, that
Hmm.
Darwin wrote that plants need gravity to grow, and that if you didn't have gravity, you wouldn't get any growth. So Dr. Joya Massa, write that down. She is the top plant scientist for NASA. It's
Okay.
Giomassa. She is she is the lead scientist for NASA space biology. And she wrote a proposal saying that we think that we can grow plants without microgravity in defiance of Darwin's, theory. And so they got funding to grow in Veggie, where they grew a lot of things, but mostly leafy greens like lettuce, spinach, Mizuna mustard, things that don't need to be pollinated or they don't need a flower to pollinate. And they started doing growth, just for like a little bit at a time. And it's not NASA who started it. It's actually the Russians who started growing, different crops in space in the 1970s in Mir. And they showed that you can take seeds up there, you can germinate them, and you can get plants and stuff. And then if you had enough time, then you could grow a leafy green like lettuce and eat that. And it was Scott Kelly and Kajil Lidgerson who ultimately ate the first lettuce grown in space. And you can literally just Google, veggie lettuce, and it'll pull up Scott Kelly and them eating that first lettuce kind of thing. But the mission of NASA space biology is to supplement astronauts' diets with fresh food. As you probably know, fire and space don't mix, right? If
Yes.
flame in an oxygenated, rich environment equals dead astronauts. And so that means that they don't have an oven on the space station. They can't cook their own food. We have to cook the food here on Earth, freeze dry it, and then launch it up for them to eat. And that works now that we're in low Earth orbit. It takes, not a week to a few months for the food to get there. It's no big deal. But when we go to the moon and we go to Mars, that margin is going to be months to years before they eat the food. And there's vitamins and nutrients that go away over that time. And they have to find a way to get fresh food for the astronauts to eat. And that's ultimately what made NASA endorse space biology is we need to figure out ways how to
Yeah.
grow fresh food for the astronauts. And that's what it's about. They won't live on fresh food that we grow. It's just a supplement to whatever we send up to them, kind of thing.
Okay.
But
Yeah,
you
wait, Jacob,
couldn't live on
could
lettuce
you turn on your
alone.
camera? Turn on your
But
camera.
sure.
Okay, cool. So keep going with what you were saying.
So the bottom line is you couldn't live on lettuce, right?
Yeah.
You have to have vegetables, you have to have fruit and all those things. But what's the difficulty in that? There's no bees in space. There are no pollinators. Also, it takes a really long time to grow a fruit like a pepper or a tomato. So, for peppers, it took 137 days for us to get a mature pepper. And all during that time, we had to have crew time where the astronaut went and took care of it. Our staff was on hand for 137 days to take care of those plants and all that stuff. So it's a big effort. And nobody has had that opportunity or the option to do that until in 2021. COVID happened, a lot of things cleared up, and then we had, 160 days in the advanced plant habitat where we could try an experiment like that. I just
Right.
happened to be working in the lab at Kennedy Space Center, and we were growing peppers. And we had showed that we can grow peppers under LED lights, that we could
Yeah.
grow it inside of the box, all that stuff. And they said, let's fly it. And ultimately, we flew it and we grew a chili pepper from here, from where I'm from New
Okay.
Mexico. It was developed here, or evolved here over time, and then we grew it in space.
So, like, what's been like the biggest challenge in getting the plants to grow well in space?
Well, I mean, there's a long list of that, right? But the number one thing is irrigation, holding the water in one spot without it floating away. The next thing is water and the way that it forms around roots. Roots need air to survive. I never really knew that before until I started growing in space. But if you inject water and air in space separate like oil and water separate here on Earth. And so if there's too much water around the roots, you get root rot, and then the plant just doesn't produce or grow anything. So that's our number one challenge is irrigation and controlling the moisture levels of whatever we're growing.
Okay, I know I already mentioned this, but your camera's off when you said this. But so, what makes the growing food for space so different than farming it on Earth?
Well, there's no gravity, right? So up in
Yeah.
space, there's no gravity is the main thing. Where we set up controlled environments in the lab that are like what's on the space station, so we can have the same lighting, we can have the same air movement, we can do the same growth media, and we can do the same irrigation. But the main difference is that there isn't gravity up in space. So that's the main thing.
Okay, so do you see some of these technologies from growing in space? Do you see it changing how we grow things and farm on Earth?
Yeah, well, a lot of these things wouldn't have been grown in controlled environments if it wasn't for those systems on the International Space Station. So we are trying things that people wouldn't have a use or a need to do here on Earth. And now that we've done it, we've learned, oh, wow, we can grow plants inside without the sun. We can use automation to control the pumps and all this stuff. And so those are things that are being applied now here on Earth after NASA did them in space.
Okay, so what's like your favorite kind of space grown thing so far?
Well, my what I'm famous for, what I'm known for is Plant Hab '04, which is PH04 that grew in the advanced plant habitat. And that was the first fruit ever grown in space, right? So it was the first time that a flower was pollinated, and then growth was extended long enough for us to get a fruit out of it. And so, as of now, that's the most complex growth experiment that's ever been done in space, and that's primarily what I worked on. But that's not the only thing I worked on. I did 17 NASA space biology experiments growing everything from lettuce to microgreens. We grew tomatoes after we grew peppers. And then, other things like where they're doing science or genome sequencing, like growing lettuce to see how the genes express themselves in the weightless environment compared to here. And then there's more stuff like circadian rhythm. How does the plant, how does its biological clock differ in space compared to here? Those are all a bunch of different things that we've done. But the biggest thing that I'm known for is I am Jacob Pepperseed. I'm the one who we worked together as a team to send pepper seeds to space and grew them in the advanced plant habitat. And then I started my own project called the Space Chili Grow a Pepper Plant Challenge, where we had kids from around the world growing chili seeds as we were growing them in space.
Okay, so can you tell us more about that project you were talking about?
Yeah, so PH04 is was called Hatch to ISS. It I started there as an intern in 2018. I was writing my master's thesis at Purdue University. I applied for a NASA internship. That internship gave me 10 weeks at Kennedy Space Center to work in the plant lab. When we were working there, they started talking about growing peppers, and that's what this area that I'm from is for growing peppers. My friend and NASA scientist Matt Romine wrote a proposal to get funding to grow them in space, and that funding became Plant Hab '04, Hatch to ISS. That was that mission. And what we did is we got seeds from around the world. We worked with different universities to get different pepper seeds. We grew them in the lab under LED lights in ISS like environment to see which ones will grow under LED lights, which ones don't mind high CO2 of the space station. And we learned that, some peppers needed more light than the LEDs were able to provide. Others couldn't handle the high CO2 that the International Space Station had. But there was a group of them that just grew and they didn't care. And it turned out that those ones were from New Mexico and they were from where I'm from. So I got to accompany my historical, my ancestral crop, and build the systems. I'm an engineer. So what I do is I build the growth boxes and the wicks, and the equipment that grows the different seeds and stuff. And we built those in the lab, tested them. Um, and then NASA said, "Hey, we're going to give you some time on the space station," where they launched it up to the space station. And then we worked with the Hatchronauts. They called themselves Hatchronauts because the famous town here in New Mexico is called Hatch, and Hatch is where famous chili is from, kind of thing. So the Hatchronauts added water to the seeds. They took care of them. They played Red Hot Chili Peppers for them at night. They did all these great things over 137 days, and it became the longest plant growth experiment in history, and it's currently the most yield ever grown in a single International Space Station experiment. And so from that point, we proved that you can grow a fruit in a controlled environment. You can grow it under LED lights, and then you can pollinate a flower in space and then grow a fruit and harvest it and eat it.
Okay, that's awesome. So, to our audience, how can people get involved in the Moon Chili Challenge?
So the Moon Chili Challenge, right? So it started as the Space Chili Grow a Pepper Plant Challenge, and that
Yeah.
was during the space mission. Now that we've accomplished growing in space, now we're looking towards the moon. And the Moon Chili Challenge is where I bring in as many students and people as possible to grow some pepper plants, document it, send either pictures or growth data to me, and it goes into this database. And at one point, whenever the time comes, we'll have a database that validates that this crop can grow in many places, and that if NASA uses it to grow it on the moon, then or that they can use it to grow on the moon. And ultimately, what you do is you send an email the same way that you sent an email to me, to JTATNASA at AOL.com, and just request seeds from me, and I will send seeds out to you with a few instructions for you to grow a pepper plant at home to record a data point.
All right. So, okay, yeah.